A lot of things have changed since the first episode of The Simpsons aired in 1989. We've seen 6 US presidents, declassified Pluto as a planet, and have lived through 5 live-action Batman actors and 3 Spider-Man reboots. What I'm saying is things have changed, and given that The Simpsons is about to start its 33rd season, we thought it would be fun to go back to the very first episode to see how different some of your favorite characters are. So put down that donut and let's get started. Donut. Homer Simpson is obviously the face of the entire franchise, and we all have a pretty good idea of who the character is in our head. But I think it's clear from the first episode to now, good old Homie has gone through the most change. He's not the lovable buffoon we've come to know and love today, but rather a seemingly normal patriarch who, yes, makes a few boneheaded decisions, but seems to have a much more intelligent thought process. And what's extremely jarring is how he treats his wife Marge. In the first episode, Homer yells and snaps at Marge a few times and tends to get easily frustrated with her about things. That's not the Homer J. Simpson we know. Thankfully, this character trait gets ironed out as time goes on. Marge is the glue that holds the Simpsons family together and grounded. She's mostly the sensible one and plays the more serious character opposite of Homer's goofiness, because she needs to be. It wouldn't make as entertaining of the show if the Simpsons family was made up of 2 Homers, right? Anyways, on a character level, Marge seems relatively the same from the first episode to now, so let's look at her design. Yes, she absolutely has her iconic blue hair, so I'm obviously glad that was a day 1 choice. Her design, though, is slightly different as her top teeth jut out just enough to look slightly uncomfortable. But to be fair, so do a lot of the characters. Crazy how far we've come in animation, right? Bart is the wild child, and his rebellious actions drive a lot of the plot of the first episode. He wants to get a tattoo and impulsively lies about his age so he can make that happen. That's typical Bart right there. He's a troublemaker who enjoys causing a bit of chaos. So the wild streak that would define Bart's character happens right at the beginning and has continued for 33 years. Plus, he still calls his dad Homer, which is something that fluctuates a lot as time goes on. And he of course delivers one of his most famous catchphrases in the first episode.
Ay, caramba!
Now whatever you do, boy, don't squirm.
Lisa feels very much like a side character in the first episode of The Simpsons. While the main adventure is focused on Homer and Bart, Lisa is forced to stay on the sidelines and briefly comment on everything that's happening. Although she's not as outspoken and opinionated as she would later become, there are still hints into her old poet soul where she briefly monologues about the frailty of man and how she's an extension of her father's genes. Maggie definitely just feels like a prop in the first episode, and that's fair. What stories and plots can you tell about a baby when you're surrounded by other wacky characters? But although Maggie in the first episode of The Simpsons is basically a non-entity, that totally changes over the years as the baby develops more of a personality. Now we know the third Simpsons child as someone who's a little rebellious, spunky, and isn't afraid to shoot someone like Mr. Burns. Now if only she would have changed clothes to avoid tripping all the time, and she might have learned to walk properly after 33 years. Patty and Selma, Marge's sisters, are the 2 stereotypical sisters-in-law that you would never want. They're a pair of chain-smoking negative Nancys who always want to pick on Homer or remind Marge that she married the wrong man. Surprisingly, they haven't changed that much in the last 33 years when it comes to personality. Here's what I think is most surprising. They're presented as main characters in the first episode, but have slowly receded more to the background as the show went on. Maybe there just wasn't that much to do with the characters, and while that's true after 33 years, they've both been a part of some important storylines and plot points throughout the show's history. Ned Flanders pops up in the first episode as the too nice neighbor who Homer hates, but that's really all that's there for the character. As the show went on, it developed Flanders' character into a devout Christian and just almost a perfect person, even though he's dealt with some of the most painful losses on the entire show. I'm just disappointed the first episode he's in didn't introduce the whole hi diddly ho neighbor bit that would become so closely associated with the character later on. Skinner? Although Principal Skinner appears in the first episode, I'm disappointed that Superintendent Chalmers didn't make an appearance because I think that's when Principal Skinner truly shines as a character. Here, he's just an authority figure who presumably pulls Bart off stage after Bart disrupts his class's singing performance. Little does Skinner know that he's about to embark on one of the best principal-student rivalries ever seen. Yeah, here Skinner lacks a lot of personality, but we'll eventually get to know him as a mama's boy tough guy who famously thinks the kids are wrong in their way of thinking. Okay, this one is the most radical change. Mr. Burns may look close to the same in the first episode compared to now, but his voice is almost completely different. We initially hear him over the intercom of the nuclear power plant, and at first, you're not quite sure who's speaking.
Hello. I'm proud to announce that we've been able to increase safety here at the plant.
I mean, in the first episode, every voice actor is really still finding the voice for all the characters, but the essence is mostly there for all of them. Mr. Burns, on the other hand, sounds like a completely different character. You know, more human, less snake-like. Moe is one of the world's biggest sad sacks, and yet he keeps trudging through. It's interesting to see him in the first episode, as his design is slightly different than what we think of when we now picture the owner of Moe's Tavern. He still has a face that probably only a mother could love, but his hair is black instead of gray, and his apron is a bright pink. Why the change? Who knows? Maybe black hair and a pink apron made Moe look too happy, and we just couldn't have that, right? Barney Gumble plays a big part of the first episode, and he's the same drunk we've come to know after all these years. The biggest difference is that his hair is blonde and blends in with the rest of his head, but other than that, it's the same. I'd like to say Barney is different nowadays by being sober, but unfortunately, as we all know after dabbling with sobriety for a few seasons, Barney is back to being his drunk self. Milhouse is Bart's best friend and a bit of a geek. He has a role in the first episode, but we don't get to see any of that winning Milhouse personality that makes him basically America's sweetheart in later seasons. Here in the first episode, he's just the kid with a deeper, more serious voice who dares Bart to mess with Homer's Santa. I just don't think this version of Milhouse has had many run-ins with the bully Nelson. He's too confident. The design and personality for Grandpa Abe has changed a lot since the first episode of The Simpsons. Design-wise, Abe is wearing much darker clothes than we're used to seeing him wear. Personality-wise, he's way less grouchy and less senile. I mean, he doesn't yell at a single cloud in this first episode. What gives? Ralph Wiggum's first appearance isn't even as Ralph. Let me explain. He's not credited as Ralph, and he speaks and acts completely different to the sweet yet precious Ralph we know today. But one look at the design and it's clear which character we're looking at here. This just seems like an example of throwing in some characters in the first episode and not worrying about fleshing everyone out yet. Santa's Little Helper started off the series as one of the most important characters. The whole plot revolves around him, and his introduction into the family at the end of the first episode made it seem like this would be a show about the Simpsons and their beloved dog. But I think over the years, the Simpsons' pets have faded into the background a bit. Santa's Little Helper is mainly just used for small sight gags above all else, which makes sense given the show's longevity, but I'm ready for a renewed Santa's Little Helper push, maybe in season 50.
You know you're eating mostly horse hooves and tallow, right? You cool with that?
You wonder why big characters like Krusty aren't in the first episode? Well, did you know that Krusty was originally going to be revealed as Homer in disguise? As glad as I am they changed it, there will always be a part of me that wishes we saw that storyline play out.